To like start with my story, I guess you have to start briefly with my mother. So my mother was born and raised in the projects in the early '60s in Toledo, Ohio, and she, came from a marginalized family. Her mother never really had, access to employment opportunities, was impoverished. My mama was subjected to a lot of trauma in her community. By the time she was a teenager, I think she was 15, she was raped and impregnated. She ended up having her first abortion at 15. The age of 16, she had her second, another rape. By the third time, when she turned 17, she was raped again, and that was the conception that was me. This time, my grandmother decided that she was going to keep this baby. And so that was kind of like my entree into this world in 1979, which was like a traumatic event. So my conception was trauma. I think I was kind of like put on this pathway to the penitentiary. So by the time I'm 5, probably some of my earliest memories, I remember my mother being with different men in the community who were very violent criminals, constantly involved in narcotics trafficking, selling firearms, and just doing things that they shouldn't be doing. And that became kind of like a normal thing for me as a child. So I watched these men and kind of idolize them to an extent where they're creating havoc in their communities, and I'm being groomed to be a criminal. I think at the age of 5, I committed my first crime with one of my mom's boyfriends who would like take me to houses. He was a cat burglar and help push me up into windows and say, Aaron, just take a knife and pop this lock. I would constantly get beat as a little kid. I think the worst that ever happened to me was probably the age of 8 when my mother got married. My stepfather used to like come into the house. He was a truck driver. He would sell drugs, guns across state lines. He'd be hopped up on drugs and just come home and like choke me. Like I remember that like as a little kid, like getting woke up and just getting choked or beaten. Whenever I would fight back or kind of tell him to leave my mom alone, he would get out this 357 Magnum and either point the gun at my mother or point it at me. And there got to a point one time where he chased me out of the family home during one of these confrontations and fired that gun off at me at the age of 8. So like I almost got murdered as a kid at the age of 8. I was at a basketball game once, got into a confrontation with law enforcement, and I end up getting taken off to solitary confinement at the age of 15 in the juvenile justice system. I don't know if any of you have heard of solitary, but it's like torture. It's prison within a prison. Many European countries do not even incarcerate adults in solitary confinement, let alone juveniles. There's all kinds of psychological literature that talks about the damage that this does to people by putting them in this isolated status. You're just in a box and you have really nothing to go on other than like deal with your mind. I think that was really damaging for me and a catalyst in the wrong way. This confrontation I get into, now my stepdad, who's been an asshole to me my whole life, and my mother, he actually is proud of me for this interaction with law enforcement, because I was attacking law enforcement and I get this charge. And now he says, going forward at the age of 15, if I ever want drugs, I'm to get it from him. And so now I'm 15 and I'm selling drugs for my stepfather. I became that which I hated the most. So the longest time I hated drug dealers, I hated violence. And now my stepdad attacks me because I tell him to stop giving my little brother drugs. By the time I turn 18, I'm strung out on drugs. My mama divorced this man and is with another man who schools me to a whole new game of drug dealing and violence and robbing other drug dealers. And that goes on for a couple years. And then they go from big baller drug dealers to drug addicts. And like there was this point of kind of like separating our pathways where I was fine robbing drug dealers and doing all this crazy shit in my community, but I was not okay with my mother or my stepdad like robbing little old ladies, breaking into liquor stores, doing anything they can to just steal money just to get high. I go out east. Nobody knows where this is, the state of Maine, unless you read a Stephen King novel or you like lobster. I'm 18 now. I've got a gun on me. I get pulled over not even 12 hours in the state of Maine. And I do something that changes my life dramatically forever. A state trooper comes up to the left side of the vehicle. I'm sitting here and he says, turn the car off, license and registration. And I'm watching this cop out of the side of my eye, and he's acting very nervous. And he's got his arm by his firearm, and he keeps like saying things to me and stepping back. And I start to get nervous. So again, I'm in these situations where I see a man that's starting to show aggressive tendencies or fear, which pulls me on edge and my adrenaline starts pumping. And I make the biggest mistake of my life. I pull a gun out and fire, and the state trooper drops. And within a second, as he drops, he shoots a round up through the window. And then, like, out of the corner of my right eye, it's just like an onslaught. Another cop is there, 15 rounds of bullets. He's just firing into the back of my vehicle at point blank range. And bullets are going through the windshield, blew out the back windshield, lodging in the dash, the radio. Until this day, 3 bullets went in my driver's seat. And I don't know how the hell, like, I don't have 3 bullets like right around my chest area. All the crazy shit I've been through, I don't believe in God, nothing against anybody that has religion or a higher power, but like, something saved my life that day. I just took off on a high-speed chase, and they get me after about 10 or 12 miles, put out a spike map. The car goes from like 120 miles per hour to like 20 miles per hour. And I go off into the woods with my girlfriend. I'm near Canada now, and we're just on the run for about a day. The next day, my girlfriend comes out of the woods and says that, you know, everything's good. And we decide, well, I decide to stay in the woods. She says she's going to take off. She runs up to this kind of like hill embankment, and as she starts to run up towards us, I run after her. Looks like an unmarked cruiser comes up. This guy gets out of the vehicle with a 12 gauge shotgun, points it at my girlfriend's face as she's on this embankment, so he's pointing down at her. Thankfully, I make the right decision this time. Instead of reaching for my gun and engaging this cop, I put my hands up and like put myself in front of my girlfriend, and now I've got the shotgun to my face, and they arrest me.
Why did I get arrested and go to jail? I was hanging out with some bad influential people, and we decided to break into a house and steal some things that did not belong to us, and we got caught. I got the record put on me as soon as I got arrested. 17 years old, I was a convicted felon for third-degree home invasion.
I ended up getting sent to the county jail. I spent about 1.5 years there fighting my case. 3/4 of that time's in solitary confinement. Because I'm just a really reckless and aggressive young man, I end up taking a plea on a few charges that were capped at 5 years, but they ended up charging me. The largest charge was attempted murder of a police officer. Again, thankfully the officer there at the scene did not get hit. No one got physically harmed in this confrontation, but because of the severity, they felt it was necessary to try to give me life in prison. So at trial, I fight the attempted murder charge. In the end, I lose. So now I'm like 19 years old. During trial, I get found guilty of the attempted murder charge, and they give me 19 years at the age of 19.
I wanted to be a corrections officer because I had an aunt that used to work at the women's facility. So she just kind of inspired me to, hey, I'm interested in this type of job. And then my dad was a cop for so many years, so it just kind of made sense. And, you know, it makes sense to me. It is typically a male-based field, so that it kind of makes you feel a little better, at least, because usually the females are paired up with males, and you always kind of have someone that's on the same level as the inmates. It is a little intimidating being one of the few females. My facility has only about 10 females out of about 300 employees, so it's a little bit at times, you know. The bad thing about being female in that job is you do get put up front and you work with more of the visitors and stuff like that, but, you know, it's a good job.
Just 24 hours of sitting there. Just same every day, in and out, same clothes, same 3 trays a day, same people, in and out, months on end. Cards, television, that's about it.
What happened in prison was kind of unique. So like, there's something about the prison experience that a lot of people don't understand. There's a hierarchy in prison. So someone that commits a murder or serious violence like I did against law enforcement is kind of on this upper tier of a hierarchy. And then like the opposite end of that, where someone is not really respected, is someone that rapes women or children. So like sex offenders or someone that's an informant. So there's like this upper tier and lower tier. So thankfully, like, because of the violence that I committed against law enforcement, it was kind of like coming in as a celebrity. And normally that's not something that happens in prison culture. You kind of earn respect, and people get to see who you are, what you're about. But I have all these shot callers and guys that are lifers doing big time coming to talk to me because they're interested in my case, because it was a really high profile situation. I'm still this aggressive, angry kid, but like I'm talking to these lifers and they're kind of like schooling me on the game of what prison is like. It took me a while to calm down, and I certainly had some fights with other younger prisoners, but for the most part, a lot of these lifers kind of helped school me in a way to, and this sounds really weird, like men that committed violent murders were teaching me that violence was not acceptable. Because a lot of them would say, you know, even though what you did, Aaron, was honorable as far as, you know, prison politics, like what you did was fucked up. Like you can't go back into your community with that type of mindset. So they taught me the value of education. They helped me fight my criminal case. So I did my direct appeal, post-conviction, federal habeas corpus, federal court appeal, like all these different steps. And they're schooling me and educating me on that process. So I'm learning about law, I'm learning about public policy, and they're teaching me the value of, you know, self-help education, mentorship. And it really, towards my mid-20s, starts to change my life a lot. And then they build a new prison. They demolished this old prison because it was full of asbestos, lead, toxic waste, God knows what else I've been exposed to over the years in this cesspool. Old dungeon style prison. Like that prison I was at was like this old wrought iron concrete walls, almost 200 years old. So like, you know, there's stuff there that people don't want to be like physically exposed to. I hallucinated in solitary, like going 3 days without food or water as a punishment. And that's not something you read in a textbook. Guys killed themselves in solitary, little young kids hung themselves off the rafters. It's just a really bad environment, and everybody just goes batshit crazy in different ways. And the longer you're there, the worse it gets.
I got sick real bad one time, got a migraine. They wouldn't give me any aspirin until the nurse came in the next day and charged me $14 to go see her. And I just puked all over the wall because, I mean, where else am I gonna go? I couldn't make it downstairs to hit the toilet. So, I mean, they really do. They don't neglect you there, but anything where like you got a headache, you don't feel good, you know, really like if you don't, like you feel like you're about to get sick, just tough it out. Nothing really else you can do about it. People causing problems in jail, yeah, all the time. People steal from other people, and that would cause conflict of interest to start fighting, because that's always the number one resolution for inmates, fight it out. Why, I don't know.
People that commit violent acts more often than not is because they learned violence or they were subjected to violence as children.
Being in jail, just you're frozen from time, really. Like a lot of people, they don't talk to you. It's like you're not even there anymore, really. Unless somebody like close, like my family, would come and talk to me and write me and stuff.
Like I didn't get much contact from my mama inside, so I have a lot of animosity towards her and anger just because she will not be accountable for a lot of the situations she put me into. My little brother wrote me sometimes. It was mostly my grandparents, I think, that stayed in contact with me and wrote me. And they would also send me money from my commissary account, meaning like I could go buy things at the store in prison. They would send me books, magazines to keep my brain active, which I think was very helpful in my rehabilitation while inside, because I just kept constantly reading and learning and thinking about how can I position myself with some type of skill set when I come home. And there's literature that shows that family connections inside reduces recidivism. It keeps you kind of connected in a small way, not a full way. Like you don't necessarily have that intimate connection with your family where you can hug them, kiss them, spend quality time. But like just that in itself, I think was helpful to keep my mind straight.
I mean, it's kind of disappointing in my viewpoint when they come back. There's some that are decent inmates, you know, you actually think they're gonna go out, be different, whatnot, and it's just kind of disappointing. And you know, I've noticed that even with other coworkers, is they think the same thing. It's just kind of disappointing, and I think a lot of them expect, even with the other inmates, they expect them to go out there and kind of be different, because we do offer college classes and stuff like that. So it's just disappointing when you see we're spending all this money on them and then they're just right back in there.
That they get me into higher education. I take several college classes. I get credit for one my last year in the prison system, and thankfully Maine had a mandatory parole. And so instead of doing a full 19 years, I only did about 10 years straight. So I did the years of 1997 to 2007. So when I was 28 years old, I came home. and got paroled.
Transitioning from jail to the real world is it's not really it's exciting. You're just ready to do it, ready to get out. The very first couple days, they're always nice. Just getting out of that routine and getting back into being able to drink a pop if you want, spend 12 cents on a ramen noodle instead of $1.50, or being able to just go outside, go outside, look at trees. That was one thing I missed the most about being in jail, was just looking at trees.
Coming home from prison was extremely difficult. Like, I don't think people really understand the profound change that happens with people, and not just the internal change that happened, but like being gone from society for 10 years and then coming out and being like saying, all right, be a good boy, go get a job, go do this, whatever. It's extremely difficult. So like the collateral consequences of conviction, which are these legal policies that there's 44,000 of them in the US that say, I can't do A through 43,999 other things that, society can illegally discriminate. I can't get housing. I can't get employed. Employers can say, no, go to hell. We're not going to hire you because you have a criminal history. Financial aid was limited at that time. There were so many barriers. You have like 9 doors that are closed, and you have 1 door that might be creaked open just a little bit. So it was very difficult. The social acclimation was difficult. The trauma that I dealt with in prison was never addressed. The trauma that I had, again, almost being murdered as a child, watching my mama get raped, all this violence that I've seen, none of that was ever addressed through counseling or any type of treatment program. So now I come out, I go from this really volatile, violent environment to on the streets, and I'm just be normal.
You get out, they say follow these rules, and if you don't, we send you back. And in my hometown, honestly, is the #1 unemployed town in the state of Michigan, that county. There's a bunch of drug addicts, pillheads, everywhere you look. There's the bad influence everywhere you turn in my hometown. And it's honestly crazy how they expect so many people there to just shape up like that, with the type of people that are around there.
Yes, prison makes it very hard to adjust to everyday life. I mean, it's almost like it's its own little community in there, and just...
That's why so many people go back, I think, is because it's kind of like culture shock. And PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, like a lot of our veterans have, when they come home from active wartime, PTSD for prisoners, I think, happens probably 9 out of 10 times, if not more. And I certainly experienced PTSD, like lights, in all honesty, like just sitting here with these bright ass lights, that's a trigger for me thinking about it, because like inside you constantly have lights on you. When you're in areas where you're kind of enclosed or lots of people, that's a trigger, I think, too. So like trying to navigate all these things. And at that time, I didn't know what the hell PTSD was or trauma. I was really ignorant to a lot of these things. I was a young 28-year-old kid just trying to deal with coming home from prison.
It's so hard for them to adjust to the outside world. They have a schedule when they're in prison. I mean, they get 3 meals a day. We have lockdown at least 5 times a day for count. They have yard time, all this different stuff that I think their bodies just can't adjust to not being told what they're supposed to do. So it kind of makes them just go a little nuts out in the world.
Every time I gone back to jail was because of probation violations, and because up in my hometown, my small town, it's not like Detroit County or anything like that. Like, you get caught smoking weed down there, your probation officer's not really going to care, because it's such a big city, there's so many people, we're not going to send you to jail for smoking pot. But my probation up there's only 17 of us. So yeah, I did 3 months for smoking pot, 6 months for blowing a 0.037, and then I got caught drinking down here after I moved here, and I just did 40 more days and finished my sentence off.
When I first came home, I think that was traumatic in itself too, trying to reconnect with family. So I remember my mama had wanted to see me when I first came home, and be honest, I had a lot of anger towards her. That was difficult, connecting with her. My stepdad and other family members were still kind of involved in criminal stuff back then. So I had people that were trying to welcome me back in the fold, but they were kind of doing some grimy shit. And I didn't want to be a part of that anymore.
My probation was a terrible time. 3.5 years of felony probation. When I was 19 years old, I had to be to my mother's house at 10 p.m. at night until 6 a.m. in the morning, unless I had permission to leave for work, and that was it. I wasn't allowed to hang out with certain people. I had to just, honestly, when you become a felon and you're on probation, half to 75% of your rights are taken from you right off jump. Like, I'm not allowed to own a gun for the rest of my life. Cannot bear arms because of my charge, ever. And if I get caught bearing arms, then I'll get sent to prison.
Talking and connecting with my grandparents was really good. They were the ones that, well, one, illegally they got me housing because I can't as a convicted felon. It's extremely rare to get a landlord to allow you housing. And so they hooked me up with an apartment. They co-signed a note for a car for me. So, like, in all honesty, if I didn't have my grandparents, which were the good, like, relative role models, assist me in that beginning, I think there would have been a point where I would have went back with my mama and other people and started robbing people and doing drugs again.
Like, the people I surrounded myself with when I got out of jail, honestly, it was my same crowd. Just not the person I got in trouble with so much. My original friends, yeah, I still hung around them. Honestly, I shouldn't have as much because they were all still smoking weed and whatnot, and then I wasn't supposed to. But I started smoking again many times when I'm hanging around them. But it's not, not their fault. They weren't on trouble. They weren't in probation. I knew all the risks, so did they. But it was my own decision. Honestly, you shouldn't hang out with people who are going to influence you on smoking pot and drinking and stuff like that. But you're your own person. You make your own choice.
If you're homeless, you can't feed yourself, you can't feed your family, there becomes a breaking point in which criminality becomes a rational choice now. So I had that buffer to where I had school, I had good family, like, assisting me. Like, if my car broke down, my granddad would be like, bring the car over, let's fix the brakes, I'll buy the parts for you. Or if, I needed something else for school, textbooks, they would give me $200 or $300 because I wasn't working. I was just living off of Pell Grants and student loans. I ended up trying to find a job. No one would hire me because of my criminal history. I got, after a couple months home, into a community college. I finished that after 2 years, got my associates. I got my bachelor's degree a year later. Still, no one will hire me. Then I decided, well, I'll go to grad school. I got at the University of Michigan for 2 years. All this whole time I'm on parole, and part of my parole requirements are either to stay in school or be employed. So I can't find employment regardless of hundreds of applications. At least I can keep going to college and not violate parole. So now I have a master's degree. I'm still on parole. I'm finishing up. I go to Western Michigan University now for a doctorate program. And nearly almost 6 years today, when my parole would end, I got offered a job at Western to teach an introductory criminal justice course. That was my first job as a faculty member. I started being more public about what it is I did. And I think I started learning the value of networking and engaging with people and discussing, like, what it is I've gone through and why I went through so many of these difficulties. Part of my story is the prison experience and the criminal activity. Like, why not utilize that as a mechanism to kind of market myself, as that's my strength. I can teach in these areas and do consulting because I have the lived experience, but also the professional experience, like going in and out of prisons. I came back to the University of Michigan, got into a doctorate education program, which I think was much more up my alley. A year later, they hired me on as faculty. And then I've been there for like the last 4 years straight teaching, doing really well. I started doing contract work, speaking engagements. I've been traveling the world since that time, looking at prisons over in Europe. I've really built myself professionally. The last 6 years I've been home have been really phenomenal. I've really just continuously, raising the bar, not just my professional development, but learning about the trauma that I've experienced and working with other people going back into prisons and working with them with re-entering society. But the first 6 years I screwed up. Like, no one was there to help me when I came home. I think me helping others is a way of dealing with my own trauma. And it's very cathartic, I think, for me to like process my own shit that I've gone through, but at the same time know I'm helping someone else that's kind of going through very similar things. I found organically that me helping others is really helping me. If I come home, it's one thing to do well and be successful by myself, that's great. But if I don't try to change the narrative and the paradigm that we have with the criminal justice system being so fucked up, then like I'm kind of complicit in that and allowing it to evolve and get bigger, and mass incarceration starts locking up more and more and more people from our communities. I have to respect those people and give them an opportunity to change, especially now that they're home. Why not help them to be structured and be, community members, as opposed to like ostracize them and then desperate times call for desperate measures. If you just isolate these people, don't give them jobs, and we wonder why people recommit crime. It's not that they're not, I don't think a lot of them are bad people. It's just they get in situations where they don't have a choice anymore but to commit a crime to survive. And that's unfortunate that we won't help
Is the system broken? Yes, I honestly think it is.
Do I feel the system is broken? Yes. It is extremely fucked up.
Is the criminal justice system broken? No. It's doing exactly as it was designed to do, which is to oppress, marginalize, control, surveil certain populations. And those people just happen to be living in poverty, more often than not, people of color, and certain systemic, racist shit goes on in the system.
As sad as that is to say, and especially in this job field, it feels like it is.
We're punishing people for doing crimes when in fact I think the government is organically creating the space by oppressing people. They're artificially creating crime. I mean, I think there are still some crazy people out there that have high levels of psychopathy or sexual deviance, that maybe that's more an internal inherent problem. Something's wrong with them. There's some deficiency where they act out and do these really violent things. But like for the most part, even murders, it's more situational.
Whereas other times there's wrongful imprisonment that happens all the time. In our facility, we see it. They'll come in and they'll give us a call and they're like, hey, we need you to send this guy up because he's actually getting out today, even though he has 5 years on his sentence.
The root of mass incarceration is capitalism. Capitalism is the root of poverty and inequity in this country. We've got 1% of the population that controls 99% of the wealth, and all of us, we are all cogs in a wheel of the capitalist regime.
Really, it's all about how much money you got. How much you gonna pay me? What are you gonna pay me? What's your freedom worth? That is all. All they give a fuck about is money.
While all the rest of us fight over resources, and that's what causes crime. Because we're fighting over things, and we don't have access to healthcare, food, a home. Of course, people in certain communities that are the most oppressed and marginalized are going to create illicit economies that cause crime. It's just a natural phenomenon. People often think it's people of color, it's people in the hood. No, in rural white communities, they're doing the same thing. It's just there's not as much policing. There's not a centralized, judicial system. Sometimes there might be one courthouse in a whole county instead of like these different cities where there's a lot more stuff going on. It's bang, 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 putting people through the system. We all got to come together and realize that we got to wipe out Congress, state legislatures. It's mostly old white men that are running this country. And last time I checked, they're starting to become the minority. Let's treat people and give them access to school, housing, healthcare, and then maybe we won't have violence and disconnect in our community. So let's be proactive instead of reactive.